People often say that time heals all wounds, but they never tell you that. For burns deep to the bone, time only hardens the scar tissue. I stood before the stained mirror in the cramped bathroom, slowly buttoning my shirt. The fingers of my left hand, gnarled and stiff, clumsily struggled with the cheap plastic buttons. The patch of skin stretching from my left cheek down to my collar and spreading across my arm was a deformed canvas of mottled dark red and wrinkled scars. It was the medal of a former fire captain, a mark left from a hellish night 20 years ago when I plunged into a sea of fire at the East Side apartment complex to save a little girl. The fire stripped me of my appearance, my health, and even my dignity in the eyes of my eldest son. But I have never regretted it. Today is a momentous day. I chose to wear the cleanest flannel shirt I owned, topped with a brown leather jacket, frayed at the elbows and faded by the elements. No matter how hard I tried to groom myself, I still looked exactly like a homeless old man who had just stepped out from under some bridge, carrying the scent of poverty, layers of sweat, and smoke that seemed deeply ingrained in every pore. I raised my right hand, my only intact hand, and gently patted my breast pocket. Beneath that worn fabric was a fragile piece of paper, yet it carried the weight of an entire life. A check for $3,200, $0. $3,200,000. A figure that someone like me, who spent a lifetime as a firefighter living on a government salary and penny pinching to raise a child, never dared to dream of. But if I could, I would willingly kneel before God, trade this ruined life, or endure being burned alive once more to return that money. Because that piece of paper was the city's compensation. It was the price they placed on the life of Toby, my youngest son. Toby died in the line of duty exactly 1 month ago. The boy followed in my footsteps, becoming a brave firefighter. In a warehouse collapse in fire, Toby gave his oxygen mask to a younger comrade, and he was left forever beneath the rubble. When they brought Toby's body back, the fire had burned him to the point where I could only recognize my son by the silver half-moon pendant I had given him on his graduation day. I took a deep breath, squeezing my eyes shut. Must not cry. Tears cannot flow on the half of my face with destroyed tear ducts. They would only make the scarred skin sting. I told myself I had to be strong. This money did not belong to me. It was Toby's blood, flesh, and soul. I would use every penny of it to establish a scholarship fund and build a shelter for children orphaned because their parents died in the line of duty. But before doing that, I had to fulfill one last wish. A reunion I had avoided, or rather, was forced to avoid for the past 15 years. I pulled my collar tight and stepped out of the creaky wooden house. It was time for me to face the man who held the position of branch manager at the central bank, the son who had abandoned me. The city today welcomed a crisp and cold autumn morning. I stepped off the bus, walking 2 more blocks to reach the Sterling Trust building, one of the most exclusive and powerful private bank branches in the area. The building loomed with gleaming reflective glass panels, pure white marble columns, and immaculately polished brass handrails. It stood there, proud and cold, exactly like the world my son had chosen to enter. The moment I pushed the heavy glass doors and stepped into the lobby, a completely different atmosphere enveloped me. It was the scent of wealth, a subtle blend of high-end lemon wood polish, expensive espresso, and the faint fragrance of people wearing $1,000 suits. My presence was like a dirty drop of black ink falling onto a pristine white sheet of paper. The clicking of heels on the marble floor suddenly paused. A few clients looked up from their financial magazines, their eyes sweeping over me, stopping at my half-scarred face, my gnarled arm, and my frayed jacket, then quickly turning away with a mix of pity and contempt. I had grown too accustomed to those looks over the past 2 decades. They no longer had the power to pierce my psychological armor. I dragged my slightly limping right leg, the lingering effect of a broken bone from a collapsed beam, toward the teller counter. The young teller, standing behind the glass partition, with her neatly bunned blonde hair and a bright corporate smile, suddenly froze as I approached. She leaned back slightly, an involuntary reflex as if afraid the smell of smoke and wind on me might infect her crisp uniform. "Hello. How may I help you?" She tried to maintain a polite tone, but her eyes constantly darted toward the burly security guard standing near the entrance. I placed my good right hand on the cold stone counter, my voice hoarse, deep like dry wood cracking in a fireplace. "I need to process a large transaction, very large, and I want to see your branch manager in person to handle it." The teller blinked, her forced smile revealing poorly concealed mockery. "Sir, for regular transactions, you can do them right here at the counter. Our manager, Mr. Vance, is very busy and only sees VIP clients with prior appointments." Mr. Vance. The name echoed, making my chest feel like it was being crushed. Julian Vance. He had abandoned our family's surname Pendleton, taking his mother's maiden name the day he left home at 18. He wanted to wipe away every trace of a deformed, impoverished father, a father who, in his eyes, was the greatest humiliation of his life. I wasn't angry. I simply reached into my breast pocket, pulled out the check, but kept it folded in half, concealing the amount. I slid it across the glass counter, revealing the corner with the city court seal and part of the Treasury logo. "I understand your policies," I said, looking the young woman straight in the eye, steady and calm. "But please inform Manager Vance that a man carrying a city disbursement order wishes to see him. If he refuses, I will leave and take this money to the rival bank across the street. The ball is in your court." The teller glanced at the bright red court seal on the corner of the paper, her initial contempt instantly turning into confusion. In the banking industry, they are trained to smell large sums of money from official state seals like that. "Please, wait a moment, sir," she said nervously, immediately picking up the intercom and dialing. Her eyes never left me, but this time they were filled with intense scrutiny and curiosity. I took back the check, carefully tucking it into the pocket next to my heart. I turned, gazing toward the far end of the bank lobby, where an elegant glass-walled office stood. A brass nameplate on the door gleamed under the golden lights. Julian Vance, branch manager. Through the clear glass, I saw a man in a hand-tailored suit, sitting in a powerful leather chair. The son I used to carry on my shoulders during summer festivals. The son I had stayed up all night teaching to ride a bike. 15 years without a single call, a single greeting, a single look. Today, we meet again. Not as father and son, but as a ragged man carrying his younger brother's blood, knocking on the door of the glamorous world he had traded his family to enter. The glass door of the manager's office opened with a soft click. Julian stepped out. Time had transformed the skinny, irritable teenager into a powerful, mature man. He wore a perfectly tailored navy suit, a gleaming leather belt, and a Swiss watch sparkling under the ceiling lights. Every step Julian took radiated the confident, arrogant aura of someone reigning at the pinnacle of success. He walked toward the teller counter, the corner of his lips curling into a well-practiced, polite smile, ready to welcome a VIP client carrying a city disbursement order. And then our eyes met. Julian's footsteps halted in the middle of the lobby. For a fleeting second, I saw his perfect mask crack. His pupils dilated, his face turned pale. His eyes glued to the deformed half of my face, then slid down to my gnarled left arm. I knew what he was seeing. He was seeing the ghost of the past, the dark hole of poverty and shame he had spent his youth running from. My heart pounded. Half of me, the old and weak father, just wanted to reach out and call my son's name. But Julian was faster. It took exactly 3 seconds for the panic in his eyes to vanish. Crushed by a cruel coldness, he straightened his back, his expression hardening like a wax figure. He decided to play the stranger. He would rather pretend not to know me than admit to his subordinates that this ragged, hideous old man was the biological father of the branch manager. He walked closer to me, keeping a safe distance, just far enough not to smell the wind and smoke on my clothes. "Hello," Julian's voice rang out flat sharp and entirely devoid of emotion. "I am Julian Vance, the manager of this branch. My staff informs me that you have a large transaction requiring my personal attention." "Sir." The formal address coming from the mouth of the son I had cradled, as a newborn, felt like a sharp knife piercing straight through my chest. He was deliberately emphasizing the surname Vance, a silent warning that I better not ruin his charade. He was looking at me with the eyes of a superior looking down at a beggar who had accidentally wandered into a palace. I clenched my jaw until it bled. A father's pride screamed at me to expose him. But thinking of Toby, thinking of the shelter for the orphans, I swallowed back the dry tears. I would play his game. "Yes, Mr. Vance," I replied hoarsely, every word weighing heavily. I pulled the check from my breast pocket, carefully placing it on the glass counter. "I want to transfer this money into a trust account, all of it." Julian frowned, using 2 fingers to pick up the check, as if it were some filthy pathogen. He unfolded it. His eyes swept over the number, $3,200. Then his eyes stopped at the bold text, "Beneficiary, Arthur Pendleton." Julian's jaw tightened. His complexion shifted from coldness to anger. He knew who I was, and he knew our family's financial situation all too well. A retired firefighter covered in injuries, living on a meager pension in the West Side slums. Where would he get $3,200,000? In Julian's mind, there was only one thought. This crazy old man was using a fake check to blackmail him, or worse, to humiliate him right in the kingdom he had painstakingly built. He glanced around. A few clients and staff began curiously paying attention to the conversation. Julian couldn't let his career be stained by a fraudster bearing the name Pendleton. "This is a sick joke," Julian hissed through his teeth, keeping his voice low but filled with venom. He tossed the check back onto the counter. "I don't know where you got this piece of scrap paper, but I can tell you with my professional expertise, this is a fake." I stood still, trying to keep my voice as calm as possible. "You haven't even checked it. Look at the back. There's the phone number for the city treasury and the representing law firm. It will only take you 2 minutes to call and verify." "I don't need to call anyone," Julian snapped, his volume suddenly increasing, deliberately letting the security guards hear. "I know your kind well, hideous, lazy, societal failures who think they can use some color-printed paper to defraud my bank." Societal failure. His words splashed like acid onto the scars on my face. "Julian," I unconsciously called his real name, my voice trembling slightly. "You don't know what that paper is." "Don't call my name." He lunged forward, his eyes bloodshot with rage and shame. He reached into the teller's counter, grabbing a precast rubber stamp used for rejected transactions. He slammed it hard onto the bright red ink pad. "What are you doing?" I leaned forward in panic, my gnarled left hand trying to cover the check. "Don't. That's the money of..." Smack. Julian violently swatted my hand away, slamming the stamp down onto the face of the check. A bright red, massive, and cruel line of text was imprinted on the paper, fraudulent/void. The world around me seemed to collapse. Every sound in the bank lobby suddenly went deaf. My eyes stared blankly at the red ink that looked like fresh blood. He didn't stamp it in an empty space. He deliberately stamped right over the tiny line of text in the bottom corner of the check. compensation for the life of Toby Pendleton. He had just cruelly disowned me, and now he had used his cheap authority to stamp fraudulent on the very life of his own younger brother. My chest tightened, feeling like a man whose last bit of air to breathe had just been drained away. I stood there paralyzed, watching my eldest son personally deliver a fatal stab to our family. The bright red ink from the word fraudulent slowly seeped into the paper's fibers, spreading like a bleeding wound. I looked up at Julian, my lips trembling, wanting to tell him the truth, wanting to scream that the name he trampled under that red ink was his own flesh and blood. But when I met Julian's eyes, filled with absolute disgust and contempt, my throat turned bitterly tight. Julian didn't stop there. The fear of his lowly background being exposed made him vicious. He pulled out a designer leather wallet from his pocket, pinching a crisp $20 bill between two fingers. He let go. The green bill fluttered in the air and landed precisely on the marble floor, right at the tip of my worn-out shoes. If you're so desperate that you have to resort to fraud, take this spare change and buy some food, Julian announced loudly, ensuring everyone in the lobby could hear. Next time you want to beg, go to the street corner. Your hideous appearance is dirtying the bank floor and scaring my clients. Murmurs arose from the waiting area. The teller covered her mouth, suppressing a smirk. My dignity was stripped bare, torn apart, and thrown to the ground, along with that $20 bill. Any father in this situation would probably go mad, lunge at the unfilial son to slap him, or scream for justice. But I did not. The years spent facing 2,000-degree infernos had taught me one thing: panic and noise only lead to death. Stillness is the ultimate peak of courage. I slowly bent down, picked up the voided check, carefully folded it, and put it back in my pocket. The $20 bill remained on the floor. I raised my head, looking deep into Julian's pupils with the piercing, cold gaze of a man who had returned from the realm of death. "Do you know what this paper was exchanged for?" I asked, my voice incredibly calm, but so heavy it felt like the air around us was solidifying. Julian flinched slightly, but kept his chin up mockingly, for the cheap imagination of a crazy old man. Then he snapped his fingers, calling for the two burly security guards standing at the door. "You two, drag this fraudster out immediately, and make sure to call the janitor to disinfect the chair he was standing next to. I don't want clients complaining about the stench." The two guards stepped forward, but as they reached out to touch my jacket, I just glanced at them. A look devoid of anger or threat, but carrying the absolute authority of a former captain who had commanded dozens of lives in the heart of hell. The two guards froze, their hands suspended in midair, unconsciously taking half a step back. I didn't pay them any mind. Slowly, I pulled an old, cracked screen phone from my pocket. With my right hand, I typed a brief text message, hit send, and put it away. Instead of walking out the door, as Julian ordered, I turned around, walked straight to a leather chair in the VIP waiting area, and sat down heavily. Back straight, eyes fixed forward toward the manager's office, majestic and motionless like a stone statue. My defiant yet terrifyingly quiet action plunged the entire bank lobby into silence. The two guards looked at Julian in confusion. Beads of sweat began to form on Julian's forehead. He felt a chilling unease creep down his spine, but his arrogance wouldn't allow him to back down. He scoffed coldly, spun around, marched back into his office, and slammed the glass door shut, convinced that this beggar would eventually get bored and leave on his own. He didn't know that the countdown clock to his downfall had just started ticking. The bank's soothing instrumental music slipped past my ears. Sitting in the middle of my son's luxurious kingdom, my soul felt like it was bleeding, dragged back to the darkest memories of the last 15 years. I vividly remembered the night Julian packed his bags and left our rickety house. He was 19 that year, having just been accepted into a business university on a scholarship. Instead of celebrating with the family, he dumped the coldest bucket of water over my head. "Look at yourself." Julian's screams from that day still echoed in my ears. "You're a cripple. You always talk about the ideal of saving lives, but what about this family? We don't have enough money for food, and the roof is leaking. I'm sick of being mocked by my friends when they see your hideous face coming to pick me up from school. You embarrass me. I'm never coming back to this garbage pit again." Toby was only 13 at the time. He ran out, clutching his older brother's shirt, sobbing and begging him not to go. But Julian jerked his hand away, got into a taxi, and disappeared into the night. He changed his surname, changed his phone number, wiped his roots clean. The rare times Toby sneaked to use a payphone to call his brother, Julian would hang up the moment he heard his younger brother's voice. My heart tightened, my chest aching as if being crushed. That cruel son was now sitting, just a pane of glass away from me, casually enjoying his wealth. Meanwhile, my Toby, the devoted youngest son who proudly traced his father's scars, had turned to ashes exactly 1 month ago. The images from a month ago rushed back, sharp and ruthless, blaring sirens tearing through the night. The new captain of the firehouse knocking on my door with a devastated face, holding a helmet in his hand. The freezing cold of the morgue. The bone-chilling sound of the body bag zipper. The charred black mass lying on that cold aluminum table was my Toby. The boy had burned to death trapped in the rubble, giving his chance to live to someone else. The only keepsake left to identify my son was a silver half-moon pendant, its edge melted, fused to his sternum. I raised my right hand, clutching the breast pocket, holding the red-stamped check. $3,200,000. That was the price for Toby's life. It wasn't just money, it was the boy's soul, his flesh and blood, the final wish that I promised to use to build a better future for orphan children. Yet, my eldest son, out of vain and cowardly pride, had personally brought down the fraudulent hammer on the life of his own brother. Julian's ignorance didn't just insult me, it trampled on Toby's pure soul. I closed my eyes. A dry, scalding tear that couldn't fall from my damaged tear ducts flowed backward into my heart, salty and bitter. Keep being arrogant, Julian. Keep perfectly playing the role of the stranger you chose to be. Because in just a few minutes, the flawless facade you've painstakingly built for 15 years will be torn to shreds by the very people you worship most. And this time, there will be no crippled father reaching out to save you from the fire you just ignited yourself. 15 minutes passed. My silence gradually turned into an invisible pressure, weighing down the entire space of the bank. The teller kept stealing glances at me, then looking toward the manager's office. Through the glass wall, I saw Julian losing his composure. He restlessly took sips of water, tapped his fingers on the desk, and occasionally glared at me with resentment. Suddenly, the large glass doors of the bank burst open with such force that the wind chimes above clanged violently. A woman walked in. She was in her 30s, wearing a sharply tailored slate gray suit, her stiletto heels clicking decisively against the stone floor. The overwhelming aura and authority radiating from her every step seemed to freeze the entire lobby. The teller, who had been busy filing her nails, hastily jumped up, dropping her nail polish, her face pale. Inside the glass office, Julian frantically stood up, hurriedly buttoned his suit jacket, grabbed a folder to look busy, and rushed out to greet her. It was Sarah Jenkins, vice president in charge of the entire East Coast region for Sterling Trust Bank, the person holding the power of life and death over the careers of thousands of branch managers like Julian. Ms. Jenkins. What an unexpected honor. Julian rushed forward ingratiatingly, offering both hands, a flattering smile blooming on his lips. "We didn't receive any notice that you would be inspecting the branch today. Please, come into my office." But Sarah didn't even look at Julian. Her vision bypassed the manager's hunched, fawning shoulders and locked straight onto the corner of the waiting area where I was sitting. The designer leather briefcase in Sarah's hand slipped from her fingers, hitting the marble floor with a thud. Documents spilled out. But she didn't care. The cold, sharp face of a corporate general suddenly shattered, giving way to shock, immense sorrow, and an ultimate, profound respect. She walked briskly past Julian, completely ignoring his hand still suspended in midair. She ran straight to me, and then, before the wide, astonished eyes of dozens of employees and clients, the most powerful vice president dropped to her knees on the floor, right next to the $20 bill rolling beneath my shoe. "Dad Arthur," Sarah's voice choked with emotion, tears streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. She grabbed my gnarled left hand, rough with burn scars, and pressed it tightly against her cheek as if it were the most sacred treasure in the world. "I'm sorry. I should have come sooner. I'm sorry for making you wait." I smiled, a rare smile that stretched my scarred skin. My good right hand gently patted her head. "It's okay, Sarah, I'm fine." Sarah Jenkins. 20 years ago, that 10-year-old girl was trapped in a sea of fire in a fourth-floor apartment. It was I who used my own body, my half-face, and this left arm to shield her from a blazing wooden beam, wrapping her in my arms and plunging through a window. From that day on, the girl without parents called me Dad. Though we shared no blood, Sarah carried a debt of gratitude that Julian would never understand. In the bank lobby at that moment, time seemed to stand still. No one dared to breathe heavily. I looked up at Julian. My arrogant son was now standing frozen in the middle of the room, his face as white as a corpse. His outstretched hand was trembling violently. The glamorous worldview he had built, his proud throne, was shattering to pieces before his eyes. His supreme boss, the person whose briefcase he desperately craved to carry even once, was kneeling and crying at the feet of the hideous beggar he had just spat on. "Manager Vance," Sarah slowly stood up, turning around. Her previously sobbing voice was now freezing cold and razor-sharp. "Explain to me. Why is my savior, my adoptive father, forced to sit in the waiting area with a $20 bill at his feet?" 5 minutes later, the door to the VIP conference room slammed shut, completely isolating us from the prying eyes outside. Inside, there were only 3 people, me, Sarah, and Julian. Julian stood huddled at the edge of the table, his back against the wall like a death row inmate awaiting sentencing. His expensive suit now looked utterly pathetic on his violently shaking body. He opened his mouth to say something, but his throat was bone dry. Sarah pulled out a chair for me to sit, then turned and snatched the check from my hand. She unfolded it, intending to sign off on the disbursement order, as I had requested in my text message. But her eyes froze. Sarah's eyes widened, bloodshot as she saw the words fraudulent/void, stamped bright red right across the check. Fury erupted. She slammed the check onto the glass table, the deafening smack echoing through the room. "Julian Vance, are you out of your mind?" Sarah roared. "Do you realize what you just stamped void on? This is a direct payment order from the city court treasury. What right do you have to destroy it without making a single verification call?" Julian stammered, sweat pouring down his forehead. This client. His appearance. I thought it was a scam. "Ms. Jenkins, please understand the bank's security protocols." "Protocols?" Sarah sneered, a smile of ultimate contempt. "What protocol taught you to throw pocket change in a client's face? What protocol taught you to humiliate a man bearing the wounds of sacrificing for this city?" Do you know where those scars you just called hideous came from? She pointed her finger directly at Julian's face, every word striking like a hammer to his skull. 20 years ago, he used his own flesh and blood to block a blazing beam to save my life. He traded his physical form so I could live, so I could sit in this vice president's chair today to hire a piece of trash like you. Julian's eyes rolled back. The first shock pierced through his brain. The father he had always been disgusted by, always denied because he thought he made him, embarrassed in front of his friends, turned out to be a great hero in the eyes of the elite he so worshipped. But that wasn't the final coup de grace. Sarah picked up the check, her trembling finger pointing to the tiny line of text buried under the red ink. And do you know what this $3.2 million is for? Sarah's voice dropped, tearing up. This isn't lottery money. This is human life compensation. Compensation for the life of a firefighter who burned to death in a tunnel collapse to give his oxygen mask to a teammate. She threw the check at Julian's chest. The flimsy but unimaginably heavy piece of paper fluttered to the floor. Read it, Julian. Read the name of the deceased that you just stamped fraudulent on. Julian dropped to his knees, trembling, picking up the check. His eyes swept over the tiny text. Compensation for the life of Toby Pendleton. Julian's face contorted. His breathing hitched, emitting wheezing sounds like someone being choked. His pupils dilated to the max, staring intensely at the hauntingly familiar name, Toby, the 13-year-old brother who had clung to his shirt, crying in the rain 15 years ago. The brother he hung up on every time he called. I slowly stood up, walking over to Julian. Looking straight into his shattered eyes, I spoke. My voice was still calm, but carried the agony of a father whose tears had run dry. The boy is dead, Julian. Last month, the fire burned him so badly that I could only recognize your brother by his necklace. And the paper you just tore apart, just stamped as a fraud, that was every piece of your brother's flesh and blood. Bang! Julian's mind exploded. The final wall of pride completely collapsed. He had denied his bloodline, humiliated his disabled father, thrown $20 in his face, called security to drag him away. And most ruthlessly of all, he had personally tainted the flesh, blood, and soul of his own deceased brother. A harrowing scream ripped from Julian's throat. He collapsed onto the freezing stone floor, his hands clawing at his slick-back hair, howling like a cornered beast. Tears of ultimate, belated regret and excruciating agony poured out. In the middle of the ultra-luxurious VIP room, the powerful manager was now nothing more than a guilt-ridden son, prostrating at the feet of the father he had once thrown away. Julian's sobs echoed, bouncing off the lifeless glass walls of the VIP room. He curled up on the floor, holding his head in his hands, crying until he choked. The image of the powerful, arrogant manager from earlier had completely vanished, leaving only a lost child being consumed by his own sins. Sarah stood with her arms crossed, her eyes devoid of a single ounce of pity. As someone who had risen from the dead, she understood all too well the cruelty of those who gave themselves the right to trample on others. Julian Vance, Sarah spoke, cold as ice. Your behavior today is not only a severe violation of professional ethics, but it is a crime. You deliberately destroyed a client's legal property. I will suspend you immediately. The bank will sue you, and I assure you, the name Julian Vance will be blacklisted across the entire American financial system. You will face prison time. Julian did not resist. He just kept muttering, I'm sorry, Toby, Dad. I'm sorry. He knew he deserved the worst punishment imaginable, career, fame, money, the things he had traded his whole family to obtain, now felt so meaningless, cheap, and disgusting. Wait, Sarah. My hoarse voice broke the tense atmosphere. Sarah turned to look at me in surprise. I took a step closer, bending down. My gnarled left hand, covered in rough burn scars, touched Julian's shoulder. The boy flinched, but didn't pull away like he used to. He looked up at me, his eyes bloodshot and swollen, brimming with a desperate plea for punishment. "Dad," he hiccuped, "let her take me away. I'm a bastard. I killed Toby for the second time." I shook my head, gently rubbing his messy hair. A final tear finally spilled from my good right eye, rolling down my wrinkled cheek. "Sarah," I looked up at my adoptive daughter. "I have the right to sue him for defamation and destruction of personal property. But I will sign a waiver, and I ask the bank not to put this offense on his federal record. On a few conditions." "Dad, Arthur, he doesn't deserve it," Sarah frowned, furious on my behalf. "I have already lost one son to the fire, Sarah," I said, every word heavy as lead, carving deep into the souls of all three people in the room. "I don't want to lose another one to the fire of hatred." Julian collapsed, hugging my legs, bursting into loud, racking sobs. My forgiveness seemed to hit his mind, harder than any prison sentence ever could. I took a deep breath, regaining the composure of a captain. "Sarah, first, I need you to use your authority to contact the Treasury immediately. I want this compensation money dispersed via an electronic wire transfer right now into the trust account. No need to reprint the check. The shelter for the orphans cannot wait any longer." "Yes, Dad. I will approve the highest level wire transfer right now." Sarah nodded, pulling out her phone. Second, I looked down at Julian, lifting his chin so he had to face my deformed half-face. "Julian, your sentence is not in prison. Starting tomorrow, you are suspended from work for 3 months. For those 3 months, you are not allowed to wear suits, use credit cards, or reveal your identity as manager." Julian blinked, tears still streaming. What must I do?" "You will go to Firehouse 4, where Toby used to work," I said, grinding out each word. "You will go there every day, starting at 5 a.m. You will scrub the fire trucks, mop the floors, cook for the firefighters. You will look straight into the eyes of Toby's comrades, listen to them, tell stories of plunging into seas of fire, listen to how your brother lived and how he died. You have to learn everything from scratch, Julian. Learn how to be a decent human being before trying to be a successful one." Julian bowed low, his forehead touching the marble floor. Yes, Dad, I will. I will do everything." I closed my eyes. The sound of the word "Dad," ringing out after 15 agonizing years, could finally water my barren, callous soul. Today's battle was over. No one won. There were only shattered souls starting to find a way to heal each other. 3 months later. The winter wind howled in freezing gusts through the streets, but inside the spacious yard of Firehouse 4, the atmosphere was strangely warm. Dozens of firefighters in neat uniforms, along with their wives and children, stood gathered around a small, temporary podium. Today was the inauguration ceremony for the Toby Pendleton Scholarship Fund and Shelter. I sat in the front row, wearing a brand new black suit that Sarah had personally picked out. My half-scarred face was still there, but I no longer kept my head bowed. I held my head high, admiring the institution that Toby's flesh and blood had paid for. Behind me were dozens of laughing, playing orphans, new sprouts of life springing from a great sacrifice. From behind the stage, a man stepped onto the podium. No tailored Italian suits, no sparkling Swiss watches, no polished leather shoes. Julian wore a simple gray t-shirt and a faded denim jacket. His hands, which used to only type on keyboards and sign contracts, were now covered in calluses and bleeding scratches from scrubbing fire trucks and hauling equipment for the past 90 days. Julian's face was tanned and much thinner, but his eyes were clear and incredibly peaceful. He stepped up to the microphone, taking a deep breath. His calloused hands gripped the edge of the podium tightly. "Hello, everyone," Julian began, his voice trembling slightly. "I am Julian. I stand here today, not as a sponsor or an honored guest. I stand here to confess. I am the older brother of Toby Pendleton, and the son who once threw away his family." The entire firehouse yard fell silent. The firefighters who had watched Julian quietly work as a janitor for the past 3 months now widened their eyes in shock. "For years, I chased a false pride, blindly pursuing mindless money, while trampling on my own flesh and blood." Julian choked up, tears beginning to well. He turned to look directly at Toby's portrait placed on a small altar next to the podium. "Toby, I always rejected your calls. I thought the presence of you and Dad would stain my perfect world. But I was wrong. My world was already rotting from the inside, while you are the greatest one of all." He wiped his tears, then stepped down from the podium. He took slow, steady steps toward me. Standing before me, Julian didn't hesitate, dropping to one knee on the freezing concrete floor. He reached out with his rough hands, taking my left hand, the one covered in crisscrossing burn scars, the hand he had been too disgusted to touch 3 months ago. "Dad," Julian sobbed, "thank you for not abandoning me. Thank you for using your forgiveness to pull me out of the fire I created myself. I am proud to be the son of a hero." I stood up, wrapping my arms fully around my eldest son's trembling body. My tears fell freely, soaking his shoulder. 15 years of separation, 15 years of resentment. Everything had been burned to ashes by the fire of a father's love, leaving nothing but forgiveness around us. Roaring applause erupted, mingling with the sniffles of the bravest firefighters. Right in the main hall of the newly inaugurated shelter, there was a solemn glass frame hung in the most prominent spot. Inside the glass frame were no expensive paintings or glamorous certificates of merit. It was a check for $3.2 million. Right in the center of the check, pressed over Toby's name, was a cruel, bright red stamp, fraudulent/void. But just below that glass frame, there was a small inscription, carefully engraved on a brass plaque. "Pride can destroy a piece of paper, but love will rebuild souls. In memory of Toby Pendleton, who ignited the fire of selflessness." That voided check was no longer a bleeding wound. It had become the eternal proof of one truth: sometimes, what seems to be the most desperate pile of ashes is actually the strongest foundation for a family to be reborn.